Good morning, everybody. It's nice that everyone's joining us this morning. Welcome to Diverse Ed, the virtual conversation number 3. We've had plenty of events and we've got a stellar lineup today. And I welcome all of our guests. We have 5 panels talking about the theme of diversity and belonging. And today is slightly different in that we are also including youth voice, and there will be contributions from young people to today's talk. If you are following along on our platforms, please make sure that if you're tweeting that you use the Diverse Ed hashtag and that you use a capital D and a capital E so that the voice recordings can hear it. And please do join the comments and the commentary on Twitter as well. I'm going to hand over to Hannah to introduce our first panel. Thank you, Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're quite glad it's raining because hopefully even more people will be watching on YouTube and Twitter this morning. So our first panel this morning is about diverse children. We've got 5 speakers. We've got Anita Fiddes Kapadia, who is head of PE and a PGCE tutor. She's going to be talking to you about breaking barriers for girls in sport. We then have Ahmed, who's going to be talking about trans-inclusive PE. Dylan is part of the Bain PE team and a post-16 student. Sandra Harrison is a SEND consultant and an autism specialist, and she's going to be talking about supporting children with autism. Yasmin Omar is a science teacher who will be exploring disability discrimination in the workplace. And then we have Dr. Tom Dobson, who's one of our partner speakers from Leeds Beckett University. I have the pleasure of working with Tom as part of the master's programmes there. He's also the co-founder of the Storymakers Press. You met Lisa, his colleague, at a previous event, and he'll be talking about co-creating stories with children. So over to Anita, our first speaker.
Thank you, Hannah. It's really lovely to be here. I'm quite excited about doing this because for years and years, I have worked so hard in breaking down as many barriers as possible to getting girls involved in sport. Like we said, I was the head of PE at Kingsley Academy. I'm at Roehampton. I try to deliver my message as much as possible throughout all streams that I'm in. And I've found that unless you go forward and do it, you won't see the changes that you want to happen. You have to put yourself out there and be the person who you want to see the changes. And I've researched why so many girls don't enjoy sport. And we've had research coming through Women in Sport that have looked at 4 areas where we can unpick why girls don't want to take part in sport. And you've got your practical side. This is quite an obvious one, really. And a lot of people sit there and say, oh, it's, they don't want to get sweaty and they don't want to get hot. And it's lots of different things like that. But actually, practically, you have to think about girls going through school all the way up to adulthood. And it goes from time management to having children to having jobs and feeling like they have so many pressures on them. And it goes all the way down to personal, social and cultural reasons as well. So it's not just unpicking one thing when you come to breaking barriers for girls in sports. It's unpicking a range of emotions, a range of social stereotypes that will help people to break down these barriers in sport. Now, when I started teaching, I thought, well, what of these areas could I physically help to break down at a school level and deliver when I'm at university to help other people do the same thing, so the message is going in as many different schools as possible. And the first thing I thought of was practically is the time. How long can I give to support students in breaking these barriers down? And ultimately, time was the best thing they needed. The girls wanted to be heard. They wanted to be listened to. They wanted to have input on the sports that were involved in schools. And I sat and I listened to them. And we looked at how we could implement these changes. And one of the things they wanted to do was change their core PE lessons. They didn't want the traditional sports in there. They didn't want to say, okay, we're going to go play netball, we're going to go play basketball. They wanted step aerobics. They wanted Zumba. And we looked at this and thought, we can do this on the timetable, we can make this happen. And we changed our core PE lessons into lessons where they enjoyed turning up. They loved the fact that we could do lessons that were linked with gyms outside of school, that were linked with things that they would then go away from school with and carry on being active. And it was fantastic. The girls' enjoyment levels absolutely soared. And then I looked at all the different areas and that were personal. What is it that was stopping them? And a lot of them said that they felt the boys were taking over in sport, that the boys got all the opportunities. And I said to them, okay, what do you want to do? And they said to me that they wanted to try sports that they hadn't had a go at yet. And we looked at rugby, and we had our rugby sessions, and we worked with clubs outside of school. Now, clubs outside of school have funding to support running girls' activities. And if it's something your school or your university or your placement doesn't have money for, look at your local clubs. I worked with Brentford Football Club, and then I worked with Harlequins, and they gave us coaches for free. Everybody loves free. And they gave us this. And they came in, and we had girls playing football. Then they moved on to, and we worked with the FA for a game of their own. And we trained a handful of these girls through a game of their own to become football coaches and run sessions. And they thrived. They loved it. We then brought in Harlequins, who went and delivered rugby sessions for them. And Harlequins delivered these sessions. And a year later, I've got 2 students who went for trials for Middlesex and got into the Middlesex team. Now, without these opportunities, these girls would never have known that. These girls wouldn't have gone down a route that they thought was predominantly male or seen as a sport that females wouldn't go and play in. And it's the fact that you put yourself out there and find these opportunities for girls that helps them to break these barriers down. Obviously, with the COVID situation, last year we were looking at working with parents. I wanted to see parents joining in with their children. We had such a cultural mix in our school that I wanted to bring parents into school to play against their children, to play some badminton against their children, to see that actually playing sport has such a huge benefit, not just physically, but socially and mentally. And to break down barriers, you must get parents involved as well.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have to stop you there. Such a great start to the session. Thank you so much for the practical strategies. And it segues beautifully into Dylan, who's going to talk about trans-inclusive sports curriculum. So thank you, Anita. Over to Dylan, please.
Morning, everyone. So I'm speaking on behalf of BAME PE, and we are a network of people advocating for equity across the whole of PE. Specifically, as Hannah said, I'm going to be speaking about supporting trans youth within PE. So in PE, we still see quite a big gender divide compared to other subjects, especially when it comes to stereotypes in sports, and even down to lessons, how they're still split into male and female, which in itself already is disregarding non-binary identities. And this can have a big impact on everyone's experience of PE, as Anita mentioned, how the stereotypes can have an impact, but in particular with trans students who can often feel as if PE is not a space in which they fit in. I myself identify as a trans male and I go by he, him pronouns. And I'm in college right now, so I'm still a student, but I came out during secondary school. And despite my passion for PE throughout secondary school, being trans had a very big effect on me and my participation. And it felt as if I wasn't always very comfortable because going to an all-girls school as well, my only choice was to participate in female clubs, the female lessons, and if I was going to compete, I had to represent a female team. And this was something that was clashing with my identity, and I was doing something which I enjoyed hugely, but I always felt uncomfortable doing it. And I think a big misconception about PE that quite a lot of people still have is that it's all about sports and fitness and competition, but it's really a lot more than that. It's a tool that we can use to develop so many different skills among students, whether that be communication, leadership, teamwork, analytic skills. And when trans students feel as if they're not comfortable within PE because they feel unwelcome because of this divide, they will be less engaged in lessons, less likely to go to clubs, and less likely to carry on physical activity throughout their life. Luckily, I had a very affirmative environment built around me when I came out. I had an absolutely amazing PE department. One teacher in particular was incredible and making me feel as if I had a safe space where I was seen and I was validated. But not every trans kid has that. A lot of my friends that went to other schools, especially in mixed schools, didn't get that at all. And what I want to look into is how we can have this affirmative environment in place for every student, despite whether they've come out or not. It should be something that every student should be able to experience. So one of the first things I would say is teachers normalizing the use of introducing their own pronouns and students telling teachers their pronouns and other students, and not having it be such a weird thing to do, because when I first came out, it was a bit weird, like, yes, I go by he, him. Also, throughout lessons, trying to use trans athletes as models alongside any other athletes that you would always use. Having that weaved into the curriculum is quite a simple thing to do. One of the big things I would say is I never really got that much. Most trans athletes that I've known about has been through myself doing research. And I really believe that if you do that in the curriculum, it's less likely that students will listen to things in the media, because a lot of the time in the media, things about trans athletes aren't the most positive things. Additionally, where possible, trying to introduce mixed gender activities and giving kids that space to explore what it's like to have PE within a mixed gender setting rather than completely being separated all the time. And I strongly believe that's something that every student can benefit from, as it's a very different experience of PE. Especially going into college, I've been mixed the whole time during PE, and it's a much better experience in my opinion. And at the end of the day, I think all teachers just need to have a basic understanding and respect for trans students who do come out to them, and just be accepting, supportive, and remember that school might be that only safe space that student has. And especially within PE, I found it that it was my escape from pretty much everything else going on. Having that safe environment around me as well really helped me in finding myself and being comfortable. And I think that it's important that every student can feel like that.
Dylan, thank you so much. So succinct, and the chat's going crazy about how much people are learning from you. You've already got an offer from somebody doing a PhD looking at this topic who wants to connect with you. So jump over to the chat and carry on the conversations on there. Thank you so much. Sandra, can I welcome you on, please?
Well, can everyone hear me? Sorry. Hello, my name is Sandra, and I'm a qualified and experienced special needs leader since 1996, with vast teaching and leadership experience. I was also a former executive head and head teacher of various special schools, and that was all around social, emotional, and mental health pupils and autism. My real passion is around inclusion and equality for individuals with special needs, especially autism. At present, I give support and guidance to parents, pupils, professionals, and organisations. The stats at the moment are not very good when it comes to autism. So at the moment, we know that at least 1 in 1% of the population may be on the spectrum. 44 to 52% have learning difficulties. We have 4 more boys diagnosed to girls, and 28% of autistic individuals are asked to leave a public space. 79% of autistic individuals feel isolated, as well as 90% of the pupils who are parents who I work very closely with. And staggering, 71% of children develop mental health problems as children. Lockdown has been extremely difficult for pupils and families because of the changes of structure and routine. We know that autistic individuals struggle very much with change. So some pupils I've been working with love it, because that means they're on their own, they don't have to see anyone, they don't have to interact. But the others are struggling so badly, they have behaviours that challenge and anxiety. The things that we need to do in school or parents at home, they need support. The importance of working with individuals with autism is to adapt a person-centred approach. Pupils start education with a slight disadvantage because of communication, social interaction, and repetitive behaviours. You need to find out the communication preferences they can relate to, which could be signs, symbols, electronic devices. Planning is also important to ensure a structure for the day using a visual timetable. The setting for some of our pupils, which isn't always adhered to in schools, is we may have the wrong lighting. We may have a classroom with lots of posters. That just gives a sensory overload, a kitchen which has different smells. Pupils require an awareness of autism to support the pupils and families. The use of educational care and health plans can ensure they receive the right support and intervention. Unfortunately, there's a big struggle for parents to get an EHC for their child. We must understand the use of different techniques on a regular basis could lead to independence for some individuals and enable them to interact socially. That is what we really want them to get to, being able to be out there socially and interact and feel comfortable, and most of all, feel accepted. I've been through experiences where I've been on a bus and a child has got autism. A young baby got on the bus and started crying. This obviously triggered that particular autistic individual, which started to cry and started to react quite badly, hitting his mum, etc. And there were people on the bus just telling the mother to get off the bus, control your child, etc. And I just think this is unacceptable. We have to accept that everyone is different and have a better understanding and awareness of autism. I truly believe that everyone can achieve their goal if they have the appropriate tools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. The stats are having a lot of impact. I mean, the numbers do a lot of talking there. So thank you so much for sharing the statistics and some of the strategies for us to help collectively close the gap on those statistics too. Yasmin, can I welcome you on next, please?
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you everyone else as well. So just following on from Sandra, honestly, I feel like that is something that I can relate to a lot and have seen a lot, having worked with children with autism before as well. So the angle I was coming from today was I am a secondary school science teacher, and I was actually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in my PGCE year. And up until that point, actually, aside from working with children with autism in a pre-teaching career, I hadn't given much thought to disability and invisible conditions. And, having been thrown into it very unexpectedly after I developed a condition called optic neuritis that actually made me go blind in my right eye, and was how I ended up getting diagnosed with MS. But by the way, I've recovered completely. It taught me a lot about invisible conditions, things as simple as, priority seats, for example, on a train. I would be somebody, because I don't look like I have a condition as serious or as progressive as MS, I would be the kind of person, who would usually be expected to accommodate others with more visible disabilities. And things like that have really made me think a lot about conditions in school. And I feel like at a time like now, during the pandemic, when conditions have been brought to the forefront, people in the media are divided into groups like, those with underlying conditions and those without underlying conditions. I feel like now more than ever, it's a really important time for children to be aware of invisible conditions, especially because so many of them will suffer from conditions. So it's to just use myself as an example. I have shared my MS diagnosis with my pupils, and it's something that's really helped me in the classroom. I do tell them, just as Sandra was saying, for example, about lighting and colors in a room, I feel like because I've gone blind 4 times and recovered 4 times, my vision isn't the same. And I try to use fonts that help my pupils. I try to use colors that they can see clearly. I try to turn the lights on and off depending on what they feel can help them. And I do always use myself as the example to speak to the pupils in my class and say, I have this condition, that this is how, it affects me. And a lot of them have, started to explore the invisible conditions. Some pupils have as well told me specific things that they feel helps them, even if they don't have a disability. And I just feel like, it's a really important time for teachers. Obviously, it's everyone's individual choice. You don't have to share a condition. It's an individual's prerogative, and part of empowering a disabled person is for them to have the choice whether or not they want to share a condition. But I just wanted to, use myself as an example today to mention that I have shared with my pupils that I have a disability, and I hope that it's something that can encourage other teachers to do the same if it's something that they're willing to do in the classroom.
Yasmin, thank you so much for sharing your personal story there, and also for using that personal story as a resource to help the young people you serve as well. I had a statistic recently about 22% of the teaching workforce have got a disability, but only 1 or 2% actually declare it, and only 8% actually use wheelchairs. And we kind of like associate disability with the wheelchair. And actually, there's so many different types of visible and invisible. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your input. That leaves us with you, Tom. Would you like to finish us off for the inputs this morning?
Yeah, brilliant. That's so inspiring to hear Anita, Dylan, Sandra and Yasmin. So thank you so much for that. I just want to talk about two problems that I perceive. One is to do with reading for pleasure and children not reading for pleasure. And the second is to do with writing and children not taking much pleasure in writing either. And the statistics bear that out. I want to suggest that there's a fundamental reason as to why that is, and it's to do with identity. It's to do with the identity of the children. Firstly, when reading, children aren't seeing themselves in books, and diversity. It's been well documented that diversity in children's fiction publishing in this country is an issue. In terms of writing, I would argue that children are not being given the opportunities to put themselves into their writer, and any author or writer will tell you that writing is about transforming that personal experience. And I think that's to do with the national curriculum, a prescriptive national curriculum, and a neoliberal testing regime. In 2018, in the School of Education, Lisa, Anna and myself set up Storymakers Press in order to address those kind of issues. And we're the only children's press that co-constructs, writes and publishes children's literature with children, and most importantly with underrepresented groups of children. We do this through workshops, through drama and creative writing workshops. The drama gives children choice over character, setting and plot, and allows them to collaborate in imaginative ways. And the creative writing takes place within the fiction. They translate their embodied drama experiences into writing as part of a community of writers where adults and children write alongside each other. I'm going to argue that what results are fictions that are original, because children aren't worried about genre boundaries. They naturally cross genres and they create hybrid texts. And I just want to illustrate that with our 3 publications today. So this is a really quick whistle-stop tour of our 3 books. They're all written with 8 to 11-year-olds. We're aiming at middle grade here, so years 5, 6 and 7. The first book I want to talk about is Nightmare Catcher. We wrote this with children from Beeston Primary School, and the teachers set it up. When talking to the teachers, they were interested in us writing a story which really fitted in with with stories with issues as a genre. We were looking at mental health, in particular in relation to gaming. When we approached the children with this, they completely flipped it on its head. I had a completely different perspective on gaming. They thought it was brilliant, and they wanted to use their identities, their funds of knowledge that related to gaming, to create a book which really fitted in with the game lit genre. Okay, so they were populating the gaming world, they were creating avatars, etc. They also were responding to the fact that the protagonist in the book had well-being issues, and as a result, the Nightmare Catcher is really, really hybrid. It's part stories with issues and part game lit. Same for our second book, which was written with girls from a primary school in Bradford, Girlington Primary School. The girls were from second generation Pakistani backgrounds. And our starting point for Zalfa and Mia was a South Asian fairy tale called The Inauspicious Bride, which I hadn't heard of before. It's a story where the female protagonist has no voice, literally doesn't say a word, and is incarcerated by the male evil character. Now, the girls, when reworking this, drew upon their funds of knowledge in relation to horror and comedy genres, which they really liked. So the evil character in the story was depicted as a horror character, quite an exaggerated horror character who lived in the forest of doom and who had a shed piled full of severed limbs. The groom in the story becomes a ridiculous, vain character who puts hair gel on his hair before his wedding. His brother's doing his hair, he's late for the wedding, etc. All of this serves to, the hybridity again serves to give agency to the female protagonist, to Zalfa in the story. The last book, just quickly, Chasing the Volcano, was written with children from a primary school in Bradford called Bowling Park Primary School. They were from Czech and Slovak Roma backgrounds. We decided that for this book, it was going to be a climate catastrophe story. So they were drawing upon the social realism genre and their funds of knowledge that related to climate change and sustainability. But they were also keen to draw upon their funds of knowledge that related to Harry Potter. They loved Harry Potter. So what we had here were that some of the characters had magical properties. One of the protagonists, Jack, for example, has stones. One of the stones enables him to find the volcano that's in the title of the story. Another enables him to change his voice, which becomes key in terms of how the plot develops. So with that one, again, we have hybridity in the form of magical realism. I would argue that all of the books couldn't have been written by adults. You know, these are the voices of children. They're drawing upon their identities to create these hybrid and original texts. The children really enjoyed, obviously, being part of this process. They enjoy reading the text, editing them. They enjoy contributing to the writing of them. Just to return to my initial point about those two problems, about identity and reading for pleasure and writing for pleasure. And we're now looking to roll those out into schools. My colleague Lisa has produced some teachers' guides to go along with the novels, to enable teachers to explore some of the issues in the stories through drama. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you, all five of you. Brilliant contributions for us to think about this first panel on diverse children and how to create a sense of belonging. And Tom is representing one of our 5 partners. So please do go onto the Diverse Educators website and look under partners and find out more about the Leeds Beckett University offer and how we partner with them. Benny's got the big job of going through all of the questions that you've been sort of like adding as the 5 of them have been speaking. So Benny, where do you want to start with the Q&A?
So first of all, there's some amazing comments for your contributions. Lots of people in agreement, lots of people saying that these are really important topics, and they're picking up threads that you're going through. We had some questions about PE, and I think, that's really struck a chord this morning. It's really struck a chord on Twitter. So it's a question for you, Anita. You talked about adapting your curriculum at secondary level. How do you feel about the primary curriculum in PE? Is this something that we can roll out earlier? Do we need a fundamental review?
Hi, yes. So I've been in a couple of primary school and I've looked at some of the PE sessions, and I know that funding has started to go into primary schools now, and they are starting to look at specialised teachers to deliver the primary school settings, and it is something that needs a lot of money put into, because some of the primary school teachers that I've spoken to are just not comfortable to deliver a practical subject, and it's because they feel uncomfortable that they can't deliver, or they don't get across to children just how much fun PE actually is. And the funding will support putting in trained PE teachers who can deliver the physical literacy needed in primary schools in order for children to start coming through to secondary schools with a passion for PE. So in terms of the primary setting, it's all about the funding to have specialised PE teachers within schools and take the onus off the actual primary school teachers, just so that we can start the physical literacy from a young age.
Absolutely, I think that's a really important point, and we know that funding is hard to come by in lots of circumstances. But you know, it is particularly important, that specialism. And I come to you, Dylan, on a very similar point. You know, the gendering of PE is a huge issue, and not very inclusive. How do you feel about moving this conversation into the primary school space?
I think it's definitely something that needs to be moved into the primary school space because, well, I haven't been in a primary school setting since I was in primary school, but for me, that's the first time I really saw gender dictating what I could and couldn't do. And even then I was thrown off because I remember not being allowed on the football team back then. And I was just like, wait, why? And I think it's important that, especially at that age, children are able to explore the different things they can do, regardless of what their identity is. They should have that the same opportunities as all their peers, and their gender shouldn't define what they get to do and then what they don't get to experience.
Thank you, Dylan. That's a really, really important point. And yes, you're right. It will be the first experience of gendering, and that idea that you can't do something. And I wonder how much we actually think about that in talking about PE. So thank you, both of you. I want to move to Sandra. There's a question for you from Audrey. Audrey's talking about what advice would you give to a school who, if they have a number of what they appear to be a disruptive pupils, but actually there are underlying needs, perhaps lots of students on the spectrum, and they're presenting with learning difficulties, especially where they're, I'm assuming, especially where they're undiagnosed and it just is presenting as poor behaviour.
Sorry. Well, that happens a lot in schools, I'm afraid. Pupils are seen as being really disruptive, but it's not that they're necessarily disruptive. It's the fact that they've either got, they could have autism, they could have any other needs. And I think there needs to be a better understanding of that. You need to be able to assess that. You need to be able, you know, I've worked in classes where, you know, this child's disrupted, get him out. That isn't going to solve the problem. The problem is you need to speak to the SENCO. The SENCO needs to have interaction with the parents. Don't just assume the child is disruptive. They may not be even able to access the lesson. If you're not able to access the lesson, you can't understand what's going on. You're going to a sensory overload. Whatever the case may be, that's what needs to be approached first. And I would say to schools that they need to have more training around special needs and the conditions that some of our pupils are experiencing. Because unfortunately, some of the teachers just don't know what to do. They just say it's a behavioural issue and take that child, remove the child from the classroom. That is not allowing inclusiveness or allowing that child the access to education.
Thank you, Sandra. Yes, that conversation part of it is incredibly important. And one of the things that came through really strongly from all of the talks was this idea of student voice as well, and making sure that we're tapping into the opinions of our stakeholders. So that's come across quite strongly. I've got a question that actually any one of you could answer here, but I'm going to go to Yasmin to start with. Yasmin, you talked about the idea that, you know, you spoke to your students about your invisible disability, and that was a movement for you. But how do we engage staff in discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion in schools so that they understand some of the issues that perhaps you faced?
I think one of the best ways to do that, if in schools there are people who would like to talk about their invisible conditions, or even if people Google them, there are loads of stories in newspapers, even something like The Guardian, for example. There are lots of disability discrimination tribunals where people have talked about how they felt discriminated against for having an invisible condition, and took this to an employment tribunal. I feel like stories are the most empowering thing in a school, and the best way to teach people. Even if you Google something like the Equality Act, it's got all protected characteristics. Even I didn't know before I had MS, what my rights are, what kind of things were available to me as an MS patient. And just something as simple as Google can really help, I feel, improve the understanding of invisible conditions.
Absolutely. Well, there's a responsibility as professionals to be able to go out and find that information. But I do think it's important in school also to have the conversation around it, and to make the space for that conversation around it. Hannah, did you have any other further questions?
Well, there's so many amazing comments coming through, and there's so many things that people are pulling out. And Yasmin, I hope you don't mind me sort of like sharing. When we had a chat earlier in the week, you were saying about the reasonable adjustments re-recruitment as well, weren't you? About the fact that you've recently got a new job. Do you want to speak to that, Yasmin, about how we can be inclusive when we're actually employing people as well?
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I was saying the other day that I'm at a school in Newham. It's called Lister School. If anybody wants to search it up, I'll put it on my Twitter. I feel like it's a very inclusive environment. I feel very supported for having a disability. It's a bit like the tagline for Diversity Ed, go where you are. I've forgotten what the tagline is now on the Diversity Ed page.
Celebrated, not tolerated.
Exactly. Go where you're celebrated. I forgot the word. Go where you're celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And that's exactly how I feel. Like, I've switched schools. I actually previously had an experience where I didn't feel supported in my disability at a time when I was trying to reconcile it as part of my identity. And, it feels like a privilege now to be in an environment where I feel very well supported. And I feel like the key difference is in reasonable adjustments, to be able to openly talk about what you need, and for the people that are in a position to be able to support you in that, being willing to help you. I feel it makes a massive difference. And, when I was at school, I didn't see any teachers that had conditions. And, I don't think it's because there weren't any. I feel it's more likely that they weren't willing to share it because of the wider stigma in society towards invisible conditions. So I think the key is in reasonable adjustments for staff, really.
Thank you, Yasmin. And Tom, I just wanted to ask you about higher education. We've talked a lot about schools today. I know you are a school-facing School of Education, but what are the conversations happening at a higher educational level about diversity, equity, and inclusion, out of interest?
I mean, first of all, if I can just say, Hannah, it's something that we're looking at master's level, in terms of helping schools meet the needs of all of the pupils they have. So we do have a new master's course starting in September, which is interesting given what Yasmin was saying earlier. Those statistics, they're horrifying. They're really scary, aren't they? Some of the statistics that Yasmin came out with. So we've got a new master's in autism learning and participation, which is aimed at teachers. And I think there's just so much knowledge that needs to be shared and gained within mainstream schools and within higher education. So it's something that we're constantly looking at with our provision, how we can support schools to support all children. And I suppose the same sort of conversations are happening at higher education level. How can we ensure that all applicants have a chance to succeed on our courses? How can we meet their needs? How can we put in place reasonable adjustment plans, etc.? But yeah, there's so much. I mean, I feel like I've learned so much this morning just from listening to you all. It's been really, really inspiring. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Benny, any final questions from you?
It's a very, very quick one, Tom, and it was one because it's very dear to my heart, but also it came up in some conversations I was having the other day about Gypsy Roma Traveller students and their voices. Your work, I know, has covered some of those voices. Can you tell us a little bit more about why it's important to have those voices made public and made visible?
Yeah, I think it's really important. When I did a bit of a literature review looking at children's literature and the representation of Gypsy Roma children in books, and it's just not there. So when we started to work, when Lisa and myself and Anna started to work with children in Bowling Park Primary School, they naturally were constructing Western characters with Western names in Western settings. And what they weren't necessarily doing was drawing upon their own sort of heritage and those funds of knowledge. And the teacher at the school was adamant that one of the clear reasons for that was because they hadn't ever seen themselves in books. It just didn't exist. When you do look at Gypsy Roma representation in books, it tends to be polarized. There's either really evil characters, I'm going back to Victorian stories here, or really romantic characters as well. So that was something that we had to, those kind of stereotypes we didn't want to perpetuate at all in the writing of this book. Yeah, I'd make those 2 points in answer to your question, Benny. It's a good question. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a really important one. I'm going to stop us there and hand us back to Hannah to wrap up this session.
Thanks, Benny. And Tom, just re-stereotyping, negative stereotyping. I was listening to Liz Wright earlier on in the week, and the casting of people with disabilities in like Disney movies, for example, can be very problematic when they're always the evil character, the antagonist rather than the protagonist. So just something else to think about perhaps for a future book. So to wrap up with all of you, I'd like you to sum up what your one key takeaway is. One sentence, one key takeaway. Throughout the day, we're going to ask people to tweet out or put on social media their pledge. So hashtag #MyDiverseEdPledge using camel case, capital M, capital D, capital E, capital P. So what would you like your one takeaway to be? I'll go in the same order. So Anita, what's your one key takeaway for the audience this morning?
Hi. Okay, so my one takeaway is that your actions will bring about the changes that you want to see. So if you don't go out there and do something, then it's not going to happen. And that's my pledge.
Brilliant, Anita. Thank you so much. Dylan, what's yours?
My key takeaway would be that every student needs a safe space for a place where they can flourish.
Thank you, Dylan. Sandra, what's your one takeaway?
My takeaway is everyone is made to feel inclusive and equal by all.
Thank you, Sandra. Yasmin, what's your one takeaway?
My one takeaway message is that there is something for everyone to learn about disabilities and in particular invisible conditions.
Thank you, Yasmin. Tom, what's your one takeaway?
I feel like the more I know, the less I know. And I'm learning so much from all of you today. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Benny, one takeaway from you or one nugget that you're going to take away from this panel?
I think for me, the strongest thing that's coming out is the need to ask children where they are in all of this and to draw on, as Tom says, their funds of knowledge. And I think sometimes we miss doing that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So let's make it child-centred. Surely every single educator in the country and beyond can commit to creating a sense of belonging for every stakeholder within our school communities. So thank you so much to panel one. We're actually running ahead of time, which is unheard of. It means we've got time to go make a quick coffee. So we'll be back at 10 o'clock for panel two, looking at diverse curriculum. Thank you very much to our speakers of panel one. Enjoy what's left of Saturday.